Well, hello everyone, and welcome to She Notes. Today we continue our series, A Beginner's Guide to Ethereum Staking, where we delve into the possibilities that anyone can now participate in Ethereum staking. This is an educational guide only and not advice, so make sure you do your own analysis as always. To continue this discussion, today I am chatting than none other with Matt Kunke. Matt is a seasoned research analyst based in New York with an extensive experience in the finance and digital asset sector. He currently serves as a research analyst at GSR, a crypto trading firm and liquidity provider. His career spans from banking roles, including JP Morgan, where he specialized in alternative investments and strategies. He also has experience in managing blockchain and Bitcoin strategy. Matt's diverse experience positions him as a thought leader in finance and digital assets. On Twitter, now, or X, Matt Kunke.eth has described himself as a crypto research analyst and node operator. Well, thank you for being here today, Matt.
Pleasure.
Absolutely. So I am eager really to discuss your analysis on Ethereum staking and staking providers because I've read your articles. I have them here, and they're a really great breakdown. They're easy to understand for beginners in general. But before we delve into the details, I want to get a little philosophical. A fundamental question: what does decentralized mean to you? And maybe can you share with us a personal story that illustrates how and why you've embraced the concept of decentralization and your role.
Yeah, I mean, decentralization is, it means a lot of things, right? There's ways you can have multiple different node operators, but they could all be in the US, they could be all in a different region. It's just the idea of having no one party that has sort of a disproportionate amount of control over something. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to build a network that's censorship resistant. And decentralization, having a lot of disparate operators participating in that network is one way to really get there. And I think in terms of what it really just means to me, I wouldn't say this is a particular me specific thing, but I just think it's like so many sort of centralized rails, whether that's a PayPal, whether that's a video game company. It's just they have unilateral control over their platform, and they can just overnight kick you off of it. And I think that's really what Ethereum is this idea of building a network that's very decentralized and censorship resistant, and no individual party has overwhelming control over it. And so I think that is like the starting point for a lot of people, and then you can kind of extend it from there. Ethereum is a very different thing versus sort of a kind of dumb money in a sense with gold versus like a Ethereum where you're basically just building this censorship resistant contract layer where you can structure agreements and negotiations and do that in a decentralized way. I think that's a pretty powerful thing, and I think as the ecosystem evolves and more apps actually come to fruition, we're obviously in the very early stages of everything. I think that will become more apparent with time.
Well, today I want to talk to you about staking and being a node validator. So maybe just spending 15 minutes on each topic and then a conclusion. And then at the end, I have a game for you. Let's first focus on staking and what that means. So I read your eStaking 101 article published in November of last year, right as the proof of stake merge was happening, and you were providing an overview of Ethereum staking and its significance at that time. So if someone with no experience were to ask you today, or even then, what is proof of stake? How does it work in the Ethereum network? And how would you describe it in a couple sentences?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like the consensus mechanism is basically just a way to come to decentralized consensus. All the disparate parties, considering we're talking about a decentralized set of individuals participating, it's a way for them to come to a consensus on something. And so the way to sort of enforce the protocol rules, you basically just have to find a way to put something in stake. And like in Bitcoin, you do that with burning energy, running calculations. Ethereum actually does it completely differently. Essentially, you're putting your money at stake. You're putting your ETH at stake. You're locking it in a contract, and you're basically following protocol rules. So there's a protocol that decides randomly of the stakers who gets to propose the next block. And it's obviously a bit more complex than that. There's rules for transaction validity. You can only include valid transactions. So there's basically just a bunch of rules and computer software that's enforcing these rules. But you are putting up money there to essentially prevent you from being dishonest. It's saying you're putting your stake to your name with basically the decisions that you're making. I'm agreeing that this is the current block. I'm agreeing that these transactions in it are valid. And that's one way for people to come to essentially decentralized consensus and keep the chain moving forward, putting transactions in the block and moving forward with it. But if I was to do something like, let's say, propose a block with, I throw a transaction where I give you money, and then I actually propose another block where I reverse that transaction at the same time, like that is something that's detectable. and my stake, I'm breaking the rules. My stake would be taken from me and it would be burned. So that's effectively disseminating that stake to everyone else in the network. But it's basically just this way to put credibility to it's a cyber resistance mechanism. It's a way to take money from me if I basically.
Now, proof of work used miners to validate those blocks, and when Ethereum went to proof of stake, they now are node validators. Can you kind of just explain what a node validator is?
So validators themselves are really just the miners, and we can go into the details of who manages those and all that in a little bit. But they're really just the miners. Instead of buying hardware in Bitcoin where you buy ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits to do these calculations as fast as possible, validators in Ethereum, they're just putting up their stake, and they're being selected to propose the next block in proportion with the number of validators they're running. And a validator, more technically, it's just someone who's running the Ethereum client software. So you need an execution layer, a consensus layer client, and a validator client. So it's basically just somebody running a bunch of computer software. And every 32 ETH they have, they can start one validator. And each validator has an equally likely chance of proposing a block. Each validator will attest to their view of the chain once every 32 epochs, which is about 6 minutes. And those are really the responsibilities they have. They propose blocks when they're chosen to do so at random, and they attest to the view of the chain, basically saying what their view of the chain is based off the node software they're running that's communicating with all the other nodes in the network.
Yeah, so you explained the proof of stake consensus mechanism. You explained the node operators and node validators. In general terms, why would somebody want to stake? Why would someone want to be a node validator? And tell me what those risks are.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, it's somebody who's running computer hardware, so it does cost money to do that. It's not Ethereum's designed to make it as decentralized as possible. It's supposed to be as accessible as possible, so it doesn't take very high specs to do that. But the idea is that you're participating in consensus and protecting sort of the credible neutrality of the chain. And Ethereum has inflation to it, and you're getting inflationary rewards for doing your responsibilities, proposing blocks, attesting to other people's blocks when not chosen to propose blocks. So you are getting paid to do that. You're also getting things like transaction fees. You're getting things like MEV, which is the more complicated type of transaction fee, effectively. But yeah, at the end of the day, ultimately, you're getting paid to move the blockchain forward. And as long as you have a bunch of decentralized participants doing that, you have a pretty credibly neutral system, a pretty censorship resistant system. The risks to it, though, are, and this is an important point because I think this is misunderstood by a lot of people. There's penalties and there's slashing. So penalties basically just mean you didn't perform your responsibility. You didn't do anything malicious, but you just performed poorly. So for example, if my power runs out right now, I don't have a backup power supply, and the system I use, it runs out, I'll go offline for a little bit. And the penalties are quite small. It's basically if I'm online for an hour, or if I'm offline for an hour, I would basically make those penalties back in the next hour that I'm on. It's basically 1-to-1 between being online and offline. So it's really not that big of a deal. If I go offline for a day, I'll make it back the next day. It just means, you didn't do the greatest job of performing your responsibilities. So you didn't do anything malicious. And you don't get kicked out of the network or anything like that. You can just keep participating. And yes, your rewards will be slightly lower because you're not making the full extent of your rewards when you're offline. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is something called slashing. And that's designed basically to capture things more malicious. So if I tested twice in the same slot, if I proposed 2 blocks when I was the block proposer, doing things that you'd have to actively sort of deviate from the rules, or you'd have to make a mistake with importing your validator key to 2 separate computers, or you outsourced it to somebody else and then you took it and imported it to your own machine. It's basically just mistakes, or it could be malicious in terms of it could be trying to attack the chain and reorg a block. It could be a lot of things. It also could just be technical mistakes. Most of the time so far, slashings are pretty rare, and the ones that happen so hard is usually some sort of technical mistake where they have a backup system that imports the keys, and for whatever reason it thinks one of the systems is offline, but it's not, and they both attest at the same time, and for that reason you get kicked out of the network because it could be a malicious thing, and you get penalized. Usually that's only about 1 ETH the thing that's really complicated about slashings, though, is Ethereum is designed to penalize correlated failures substantially more than others. So substantially more than, as I just described, sort of like a tech error. If I have a one-off tech error and I double sign something by myself, that's not really a systematic risk to Ethereum. And Ethereum punishes you in response to that. So it has a very dynamic fee or very dynamic slashing bill that depends basically on how many other people got slashed around you. So in the worst theoretical possible case, there actually are scenarios where this has never happened before, but you have a max correlated slashing failure, and the 32 ETH it takes to run a validator goes to zero. And that's why, I don't know if this is the most appropriate time to get into that, but that's why running minority clients is actually very important, and going with minority operators is important because they're less likely to run into those sorts of issues.
Yeah, I would definitely like to get into that in the next part. So you kind of highlighted really the risk for being a node validator and validating those blocks is really not being offline, but the slashing issues that rarely occurs. But that's what happens, and you have a risk of your staked ETH being gone or reduced based on that. So that's probably the number one risk, and that's probably a scary risk for many. Now, tell me about staking. Someone wants to just stake their ETH. Tell me about that risk, and then go ahead and tell me about the approaches to Ethereum staking, like you did in your article, the types of staking: solo staking, staking as a service, staking on an exchange, or decentralized. Yeah, the types of staking. So someone is listening to us today. They're thinking about staking their ETH. They have a lot of stacked ETH that they want to stake. If you could kind of go over the different approaches to where the types of staking.
Yeah. So ultimately, there's only one actual type of staking. Staking is built into the Ethereum protocol. It's done through the beacon chain. And that is sort of what I described earlier. It's an individual who needs 32 ETH. So it's a large financial commitment. It's like $64,000 today. And they need to run an execution layer client, a consensus layer client, a validator client. And it's basically just all the software. They need to run their server that runs all the software, and it tracks the chain and votes on its view of the chain. So it's all that they need to do. It takes a lot of money. You lose your liquidity. You lock your ETH in there. And that is the only way to stake in Ethereum in a traditional sense. Now, because of all those UX hurdles of being expensive and illiquid and operationally pretty complex for the average person, there have been a lot of services that have disintermediated that and basically have outsourced some of those responsibilities. But I do think that's an important point to recognize, because at the end of the day, that's the only way to stake Ethereum. And so it's really just service providers that are taking your money and doing that for you. There's not other ways to stake. It's just people doing the responsibility for you and charging you a fee to do it. And so, so I guess going down, that's the initial, that's the main, that's really the only approach. And then from there, you have a few main options. So centralized exchanges are one of them that early on, they have large client bases already. They have people that are trading digital assets. And so it's a natural fit that they can do this in a very centralized way. They can hire the people who know how to manage a node and run validators. And so they can just straight up take client deposits. You have Ethereum held on Coinbase, and this obviously depends on regulation and stuff like that. So some exchanges don't do it, and it depends on the client, it depends on the location. But they could just take your deposited ETH, and they could just stake it on your behalf and say, your ETH is locked in our exchange. You're going to get whatever percentage of rewards are at that time, and we're going to take a fee. And because it's a centralized exchange and it's super easy, they might actually take a pretty large fee. They're usually more expensive than most. And so let's say they take 20% of your rewards, but that's pretty easy. You can get your ETH back in a few days usually, and you don't have to do anything. In your mind, you just hold ETH, and they've staked it for you, and you get some rewards, and you lose a tiny bit of liquidity, but you can get your money back pretty quickly. That's one approach. That's the centralized exchanges. The next approach is, and that's, I should say, when you're on an exchange like that, you don't have custody, right? The keys are all held, they're all managed by the exchange. So another approach is what I would just call as staking service providers. And these are the ones who there's a few flavors of this. There's the institutional ones, I would say, like the Figments of the world, that are kind of pretty similar to the exchanges. They're going to have full control, and they're going to manage the stake for you in the same way that I sort of just described with Coinbase and the other exchanges. Usually these are going to be for larger providers, and they probably are going to charge you lower fees because they're catering to bigger stakers as opposed to retail stakers. And then there's the approaches like the all nodes of the world, and which is a great way to at least learn a little bit more about staking and moving along that trajectory of staking. And they allow you to do this in a non-custodial fashion. So this requires a little bit of knowledge of how Ethereum staking keys work. But basically, you have validator keys, which are the ones that allow you to propose blocks and attest to transactions. Basically, the ones that let you vote on your view of the chain. And then you have a separate withdrawal address. And the importance of that is basically just that. Since your keys have to be online to, report your view of the chain every 6 minutes, it's not super secure. You'd like your withdrawal address to be a cold wallet. So those are actually separated and they're two different things. But the way the all nodes and staking service providers work is you can generate your own validator keys, and you can upload. You can basically give them to them. So you can say, here are the keys, manage this for me. But at the end of the day, I still have my own copy of the key. That means I can basically leave with it. I can exit it. I haven't given up full custodial control over it. But yes, they control the actual voting, and they could theoretically exit, or they could theoretically slash you. You're trusting them to manage the operations of voting correctly, but you still own the keys and you can still go and leave on your own. So that's like how staking service providers like all nodes work. And then what's really gotten substantially more traction than everything else is what we call liquid staking. And so what I've described so far with centralized exchanges, institutional staking service providers, those have fixed the problems of high capital costs. Like, you no longer need 32 ETH because they can pool a bunch of people's deposits together and get to 32 ETH. And they fix the problems of challenging burdensome operational requirements. You don't have to run a server. You don't have to manage the client software, but they don't give you liquidity. You still have your stake locked, and you still got to wait until you got to request to exit your validator and get your money back. Liquid staking providers are protocols that they work in the same way, where they pool a bunch of users' deposits, but the protocol will actually issue you a receipt token. So they're actually going to issue you like an ERC20 token on the Ethereum blockchain that is just a fungible token that is a tokenized deposit of your stake. And so your stake, you're still getting your share of stake rewards. Your rewards are growing. Your ETH is gaining share, but you have a liquid token representation of that. So that means you can trade it in the secondary market. If you wanted to actually redeem it, it would still be the same as sort of the other approaches mentioned, where, generally speaking, you're going to have to go through a queue or wait a little bit of time, a couple of days. But you could then go on Uniswap or Curve and swap it for ETH or whatever other token you want immediately. You can go borrow against it to get leverage. You can go lend it for yield. Like, there's all the sort of features of DeFi that become available to you. And that's a pretty powerful thing when you just have the ability to use financial services around it. So that's been the largest part of the market. That's dominated by Lido. That's where all the headlines are around Lido. And then how these entities are actually set up on the back end, it varies a lot by entity. So like there's folks like Lido who are really more of a delegation layer. They're not actually managing any of the validators themselves. So they're not the node operator managing the validators, but they just take the stake and they delegate it out to other node operators to manage. So there's 37, I think, of them at Lido, which is different than, say, like a Coinbase, where you don't really know who's managing it, but you do know, like, unilaterally Coinbase they're the node operator that controls all of the stake. Where in Lido's case, the 33% or 32% that they have, it's distributed across like 37 different entities.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point at the beginning, which is that there's only really one way to stake, and that is on the Beacon chain. And so you're using these other staking providers, and there's different trade-offs depending on which one you use, and there's different risk. The way I look at this really is, I think there's two sets of people. There's people that are just going to stake because they don't want to be a node validator. And so they want to know, like, where can I stake and where's my risk? And then you have other people that say, no, I want to actually, use my node, be a validator, be able to supply this to the network and to be able to be a part of the network, but then also be able to earn more APY. So that's kind of how I look at it. The liquid staking token, the liquid staking derivatives, they're pretty fascinating, just in their tokenomics in general and being able to earn interest on top of your ETH. So the next thing, finally, you made some market predictions a year ago. I'm wondering in that article. So I'm wondering if you have looked back and determined if you still hold true or if the market's telling you something different. All right. So let's look at the charts to see if, looking back and see if you still hold true to on the market predictions that you had. A year ago, you said the amount of ETH staked will increase. All right. So show me the staked ETH from a year ago
Yeah.
and what it's
So if you
done.
were to go back a year ago, you have ETH that was about 15.4 million staked ETH. Today, you basically doubled since then, just a hair under doubled. You're at 28.1 million. So yeah, you've gained 13 million staked ETH.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting here is also just the slope. You'll see like the slope change was pretty sharp right here. And what this was the Chapella upgrade. So there was only about 2 million. So in the last year, only about like 2 million or 3 million were grown in the first 6 months. And then the Chapella upgrade, this enabled withdrawals. So for the first time since the Beacon chain was launched, like 3 years ago, for the first time since then, people were able to actually go through the process of withdrawing their ETH. And I think what that did for a lot of people is it made them more comfortable about the risk. There wasn't like a risk. There was always like scares historically of people being like, oh, the merge will never happen and you're never going to be able to get your ETH back. It's going to be stuck.
Right.
So this was just a massive de-risking event for staking. Like you can now get your ETH back in a couple days, and that's exactly what you saw. Then like after April, you're at 18 million, ran all the way up to 28 million over like the next 6 months. So a pretty drastic step, like just shift in stake after that.
Now, what about the centralized liquid staking providers and what they've done in the last year?
Is the wording I use centralized liquid staking providers?
Yeah, basically, I can pull it up, but basically you said that centralized liquid staking providers will attract the majority because it's easy, which makes sense, right? Like, Coinbase, I think, is number one. Is that right?
So are we saying just centralized exchanges or liquid staking?
It was centralized exchanges.
Yeah, sorry, I see the exact quote. Liquid staking providers and centralized exchanges. So I do agree with that. You're bucketing those two things together. The Coinbases of the world have, they have direct customer access. They have customers that already have a lot of deposits there that make it easy. And I think liquid staking tokens even more so. I would say like the big difference between those two things is the people who are more crypto native than others. So liquid staking tokens are really only used for the people who are on chain and actually transacting on blockchains. They don't really have a bunch of integrations with exchanges. If you're just like a Coinbase customer, for example, you can't go buy, at least last I checked, you can't go buy like RE, Rocket Pool staking token or Lido because
no. That's a Uniswap.
So you need to go. So I completely stand by that. That like either the average user who does not use like blockchain, who does not use non-custodial transactions on chain, they are going to, if they are going to stake, they're going to most likely stake through their centralized exchange, their Coinbase, their Kraken, their Binance. And conversely, on the other end of the spectrum, if you are somebody who's a little more crypto native, a little more active, you're probably just going to go with a liquid staking provider if you're not doing it yourself. They're the ones that give you liquidity, and you just have that flexibility to take it, do a lot more things with it.
Yeah. Now, you had said also that Coinbase liquid staking may catalyze a blurring line between centralized versus liquid staking. What did you mean by that?
I just meant, which I still think in hindsight is pretty interesting, that historically you just had centralized exchanges. They would just take your ETH deposits and give you like you would accrue rewards, but you didn't have any staking token. You didn't have any liquid staking token. Like as we discussed earlier with Lido, you have STETH that gives you this receipt token, and you can take it and go do a bunch of things with it. Historically, that didn't exist for exchanges. You just you couldn't take it with you. You were staked, and if you wanted to unstake, you really couldn't historically before withdrawals. But then now, after, the idea would be that you would just unstake and you get your money back with time. And what happened there was like Binance and Coinbase, they actually issued liquid staking tokens in the same way that like Lido and Rocket Pool have. And I don't think you
I see.
have to take them. I don't think by default, but I think it gives you the option to basically take them. So like my stake in Coinbase, I can actually just go take my CBE against it, which is their staking token, and I can move that to my MetaMask wallet or my Rabi wallet and use it in a more non-custodial fashion versus how it existed previously, where that wasn't really an option.
Okay, I understand. Okay, so the last prediction I just wanted to go over before we go into the second part is talking about liquid staking. You said like Rocket Pool, but I wanted to go over Rocket Pool as far as the liquidity gaps. You had mentioned that the liquid staking providers like Rocket Pool will gain further traction as liquidity gaps as our ETH decreases. And then also the demand for operating a node on Rocket Pool may attract others, and there would be an increased demand.
Yeah. So the comment initially was just the idea that this is before withdrawals were enabled. So the only way you had liquidity for any of these things was if there was a deep pool on, say, Curve or Balancer or Uniswap, and you had the ability to transact and get out of your position cheaply. And Lido is sort of the largest first mover advantage, or first mover in the space, always had quite a big advantage there with like liquidity and depth. But then the thinking was at the time was, well, liquidity kind of becomes slightly less important when you can just withdraw if you need to. Like if for example, if you're trading at like a 5% discount, this is how it is in practice, but if you're trading at a 5% discount, I'm not going to go sell on a liquidity pool. I'm just going to redeem and get all the money. So that was kind of the idea, was just that liquidity could be less relevant when you have the ability to exit. Yeah, I'm not actually sure if that ends up being true. I don't. There are other. Yeah.
I guess it's really to tell,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, there's just also been. It's hard to like I guess I would say I thought Rocket Pool would be able to scale more than it has. So I guess I don't know if this is the most appropriate time, so you direct me, but I guess there's a big difference in like the scalability properties of very decentralized operators like Rocket Pool, and I would say still decentralized but more centralized operators like Lido. And so I thought I would have said I also thought after a few upgrades around then that Rocket Pool would be able to scale a bit more than it has, and I think it's been a little bit limited there. Kind of the other side of the spectrum where it's embraced, where it's for the individual, it's for pushing the boundaries of Ethereum's decentralization, allowing anybody to participate. You didn't go and have to fulfill an application, submit an application to Rocket Pool to see if you can run a node on their network. That you just got to put up the ETH bond,
right?
And exactly, you're able to permissionlessly participate, and you just got to put up a little bit of capital. And I mean, that's a pretty interesting and pretty powerful thing. And you see that's like Rocket Pool has, I think, over 3,000 node operators, while like the other liquid staking providers, Lido is 37. Some of the others, and quite frankly, most of the others have less than Lido. So there's that.
Well, let's move into part two, which is node validators, which we briefly discussed in the great staking debate, which I really wanted to get into. Now, you gave a brief description of what a node validator was. You gave a brief responsibility that they have in the Ethereum network. In general terms, just tell me what you need to become a node validator. If somebody said, I want to do this, I don't have any technical experience, kind of like myself, what do you need to become a validator? Include hardware, capital, knowledge, and any other resources.
Yeah, I guess just to caveat first, I think this is important. The second paragraph in there, the distinction between a node operator and a validator is one of the most common sources of confusion. And so the validator is like the actual entity that's on the beacon chain and is participating in consensus. And it's the one managing the key. It's the client that manages the validator signing keys. And that a validator corresponds to 132 ETH deposit. So, for example, if you're an individual with 100 ETH, you would need to run 3 validators, and you would have a little ETH left over at your 96 ETH. The node operator is the individual, the person actually behind it. So that's going to be you once you have your node up and running, and that's the person actually managing that. So, for example, one node operator could run 1,000 validators. Like, for example, Coinbase, I think, as a single node operator manages over 100,000 validators. Or it could be someone like me or you, who is one individual who might run a small number of validators. So I think that's a really important point, because it is like the actual decentralization properties there. It's really, if one operator is running 120,000 validators, it's just one person controlling it. It's not 120,000 people. And so that's like a key point of distinction, where like the number of validators doesn't tell you how decentralized it is, but like the number of operators and like where they're all located and who controls them. And so I think that's just, I wanted to clarify that real quick. Sorry for a little tangent, but then going to
Yeah, yeah.
going to the hardware and the software. So you need a server. That's I want to be clear. That's like I want to say probably around $500 for my setup. You can get like a little Intel mini PC. There's more expensive pre-made versions like the app Node and Avato that you can go and buy. But
Hmm.
basically, you need a computer. I think you need probably about 2 terabytes or so of SSD space, and I think the latest people are saying is about like 32 gigs of RAM. You don't really need a particularly strong processor, and yeah, it's nothing out of the ordinary, and that's part of the whole ethos of Ethereum, and that's like a key distinction between like Ethereum and like Solana is like the idea that like everybody should be able to validate the chain. Everybody should be able to, with pretty low grade hardware, track the chain and see for themselves what the state of affairs are. So you need about spend about somewhere in that range of about $500 for that setup. And then software wise, there
Hmm.
are now after the merge, you need to run a full node, which includes an execution layer client, a consensus layer client, and a validator client. And there are there's for like redundancy reasons and for diversity reasons, these clients are all following a spec, but they're implemented in different forms of code, different optimizations, things like that. So they're slightly different, and you just need to pick one of each of those. And yeah, that it is you got to manage that. You want to track maybe their discords and figure out when like new releases are coming out because those things are getting updated and there's being bugs being fixed. And that's essentially what you have to do. There are like if you want to be a node operator through Rocket Pool, they have like a smart node stack that simplifies that process quite a bit, and they have a lot of docs to help you there. But that's generally it. You got to buy a server and you
Hmm.
got to run Ethereum client software.
Yeah, so you need a processor, you need 32 gigabytes of RAM, you need 2 terabytes of SSD, and then we can talk about this in a minute when we go over the protocols or whatever. But I have a question for you. Do you think that anyone that is willing to learn and get all of this that you said can be a home validator?
I do. I think, especially if you're willing to, it comes to, are you willing to put in a little bit of effort? Are you willing to ask questions? There's an
Hmm.
oversupply of excellent documentation out there on how to do this, videos, docs, people sitting in discords willing to help you, the whole staker community, the whole Rocket Pool community. So many people that are there willing to help you. So I fully do think that. I would say it is also something that if you're not very familiar with computers or servers or any of this stuff, it's not something that you do in 20 minutes. Like you do need to read some docs and figure things out a little bit, but it's definitely achievable for anyone who's willing to put a couple hours of work into it and ask a few questions.
I like to kind of end about going over the protocols and the options to be a node validator. You had said earlier you can be a solo staker on the Beacon chain. You have to have 32 ETH, which a lot of people don't. So there's other options. If you could just go over the most common options, maybe what you like to do or what your node is set up on, and what
Yeah,
advantages of
so on the
each.
node operator side, your options are essentially, uh, you know, be a solo staker, stake directly natively in Ethereum, get 32 ETH and do that. That's one option. I personally am a Rocket Pool node operator,
Mhm.
so you leverage their smart node stack, and that it has several advantages. It's simpler. It's a lot of the client software updates are basically managed for you through a smart node update. So instead of tracking one execution layer client, one instance layer client, and like updating and keeping that all up to date. Rocket Pool makes it a little more simple. It takes less capital. You can run with about 10.4 ETH per validator instead of 32. So that's one approach that I do. There aren't really a ton others today. Stater recently came out and they have a setup quite similar to Rocket Pool. They actually forked Smart Node and they actually do have a permissionless permissioned mix. They have two different pools, so you can also be a node operator similar to Rocket Pool via Stater, and I believe that's really it
Mhm.
today. Stakewise is coming out very soon, which I'm really excited about personally with a different setup, but it's not out yet, and I think really more to come there. I can't speak a ton about all the details there.
So it sounds like there's a lot of things that are coming down the pipeline for ways for home staking and
And
node
I should
operators.
probably actually just say real quick. So that's on the node side because there are, and I'd recommend going to the lighter report we wrote. That's like quite candidly, as much as we're trying to push for people to run their own nodes and be operators, the average person is going to buy a liquid staking token. And so on that side, that is an important
Yeah.
thing. Like there's a ton of liquid staking tokens to look at, and we cover a bunch of those in that report too. Like you have Lido's stake ETH, you have Rocket Pool's RETH, you have Frax's FRX ETH, Swell's SWETH, Stater's ETHX,
Mhm.
EtherFi's EE, Stakewise is coming out with their OS ETH, DV is coming out with their Div ETH. So there's really quite a lot of options out there today. And yeah, it's definitely worth exploring more. And I would kind of just defer to that report for the details of those. There's really a lot to say.
Speaking of that, can you elaborate on the debate surrounding Lido's centralization and its impact on Ethereum's social contract values?
Yeah, I think this is a really nuanced and like it's a bit of a hyperbolic thing too. People like in crypto to pick their sides and be very loud and have really strong views about things, which is fine. But I guess I'll just say first, what's it like Ethereum's consensus? There are a few key thresholds that allow parties with that much control to have like certain powers, and 33% is the first like key threshold. There, there's like 33%, 50%, and 67%. And the idea is Ethereum requires 67% of votes to finalize. So in theory, right, if it requires 2/3 of the votes to finalize, if one person controls a third of the votes, they can single-handedly, like unilaterally, prevent Ethereum finality. And people get very scared about that and bring up that argument a lot. Now, this kind of goes back to what I said earlier, though, about how Lido's keys are actually managed. Like, where the individual node operators have Lido's keys partitioned across them. So Lido has 37 operators. The largest one of those operators is just over 1% of stake. So realistically, since those are all different operators, for them to actually halt Ethereum's finality, they would all have to collude. You would need to take all 38 of them to actually prevent that, to actually cause that to happen. And that's not something that Lido controls. Like the individual operators control those keys. And it's also a thing that it just doesn't even make sense. So like Ethereum has a finality or Ethereum has an inactivity leak. And the idea of that is basically when finality is halted for a sufficient amount of time, it penalizes the people halting finality. They lose their stake. Like the penalties we discussed earlier, they go up substantially. And so the people who are halting finality are losing their stake. And that's going to result in the people who aren't halting finality, their stake growing in proportion until eventually they reclaim 2/3 of the stake. So effectively, the attacker's stake is going to fall below 1/3, and the chain will start to finalize again. So like even if this was theoretically like a real attack vector, like the attack would occur at their own peril. They would be losing their own money to execute it. There's not really any way to exploit it. So it's really one of those lines in the sand that people they point to, and it's like a good social signal for people to rally behind. Because I fully agree that we would like Lido to be probably in the 20% of stake versus 30. It's just a large number. But I do think like the nuance of the argument is a lot more about the fact it's not about the actual 33% threshold. It's more about like soft things related to their governance and how much control their governance has over the setup.
Is this the hard set rule, or is there talks of maybe getting more and having a different number in the future?
In terms of operators, I think they're continuously looking to expand those, which is fantastic. They just added, I think, 6 or 7 last month. So that's good. In terms of like the actual validators themselves, the stake they're willing to take in, Lido is not, they haven't like, committed to limiting or anything like that. So they will take in as much stake as people give them. So certainly that's a controversial thing that some people very much dislike. Other people think, it's Lido following the economic incentives. It's kind of, there's a lot of different opinions on that. But yeah, they're definitely looking to expand their modules for how they allocate stake. I know they have plans in the future to add more permissioned operators. They have plans in the future to add permissionless operators, and they just approved, I believe, in like the last week, like a DBT module. So that's like the idea of like squad staking. And quite honestly, I don't know the details of how what they're planning on implementing that with. I think they're using Oval first, but I think they're partnering with Oval and SSV, and that's another way that you can improve decentralization of Lido's operator side.
Got it. So just to repeat back kind of what you were saying about Lido, right now, currently if you just look at it just as Lido in general, they have 1/3 of the vote. But if you break it down, every single separate validator would have to vote the same in order to override the 1/3 of the vote. And in order for them to actually create any malicious attack, they would probably get slashed, and there would be really no benefit for them to do that.
Yeah, they could get slashed. They could also just be penalized, like without double signing. They could just vote one way that's different from everyone else, and there would therefore not be 67 or 67% vote to finalize, but they would be penalized. Technically wouldn't be a slash thing, but they would be penalized, and their stake would go down at a very sharply growing rate until finality resumes.
Mhm. And what you're saying is that right now they're currently working towards different things to kind of help to make it more decentralized items that you were
Yeah,
saying
and
before.
I think also the key point here is like governance. Governance, I think, is the main concern that their LDO token holders control they have a large amount of control in terms of choosing who the operators are, who's on that permission list, and who can become operators. Things like the treasury, the withdrawal addresses, they just have quite a lot of control, and um, that the distribution of that token is pretty concentrated. It's if you look at the votes historically through their governance, it doesn't take many people to swing that, and it's controlled by a very small number of people. So people are concerned about that particularly having an oversized impact on Ethereum because that governance token is backed by 33% of the stake essentially. They've also taken steps, and they're working on steps to improve that. They've acknowledged themselves in their own self-graded scorecard that they basically are failing on governance, and they have plans to introduce other sorts of upgrades in the future. The most prominent one is dual governance. So the idea being that instead of letting LEO token holders like unilaterally decide the path forward for Lido, allow ST holders, the state ETH, Lido stake ETH token holders, to have a veto route. So basically, people who are holding stake ETH are naturally going to be more aligned to ETH then you don't really know how aligned a Lido token holder is to the value accrual of ETH and moving in the right direction there. So allowing stake ETH holders to veto governance proposals of LDO holders is one way that you can mitigate some concerns.
Interesting. Okay. Well, only time will tell. So finally, wrapping this up before we do our game to end, what advice or recommendations would you offer to individuals looking to get involved in Ethereum staking or becoming a node operator, especially considering all these new developments and trends in the
Yeah,
space?
I would say just get on Discord and start asking questions. There's so many good docs out there. ETHStaker's fantastic. Rocket Pool's fantastic. The people at Lido are very smart. Go in there and ask them questions too. Like all these people, there's a lot of debate, a lot of like a bit of animosity, but like at the end of the day, I think most people in this community are trying to improve. Like they're trying to improve the Ethereum ecosystem in the best way that they think they can. And there's different debates on people's views on that, but all these people are doing their best to improve Ethereum. And I would just go ask them questions. They're great resources, and there's really a lot to learn from them. Like I said, for me personally, like the docs at Rocket Pool have been probably like the single-handedly most helpful thing for me. If you want to really get into the technical details of like Ethereum staking and just Ethereum, can't recommend Ben Edgington's book, Upgrading Ethereum, more than anything. It's just online for free. I'd say he's single-handedly probably been like the most informative person for learning about the Ethereum protocol for me. So like I highly recommend that. But I also acknowledge that that's for people who want to really learn the nuts and bolts of how things work. It's not going to be like the easiest read. It's pretty technical, but it's an excellent resource. So his book's fantastic. Rocket Pool Discord.
Okay.
ETHStaker.
Good advice. Good advice. As a new Discord, I've probably been using Discord for the past year now. Rocket Pool's Discord, the support is amazing. They get back to you right away. They really want to help you. So I was really impressed, and I'm kind of addicted to Discord now. So
I gotta give them credit. Like I know I'm slightly biased, but I like going and writing this report and covering like 10 protocols. The amount of like people answering questions in Rocket Pool is second to none. There's so many people. It's so active all the time. It really is second to
none. Mm-hmm. They have a pretty amazing community. So, all right. Well, we are going to end with a game. I'm going to let you pick your game. I have two games that I've made up. So it's either Ask the Node Validator, okay, or Crypto Lab Speed Scholar.
Wow. I don't know what number 2 is, so we're going to go with number 2. I'm intrigued for the mystery.
Crypto Lab Speed Scholar?
So that's why I like the mystery.
Well, let me tell you. Yeah, okay. So, and this is a quick one. So you get 1 minute to answer as many questions as possible. I will tell you, I've probably given this game to maybe 25 times. The most, what Crypto Lab Speed Scholar was 10. Okay. So that's what you have to beat. 60 seconds to answer as many questions as possible. If you don't know, just say pass.
Let's do it.
Are you ready? Go. Physical storage device such as a flash drive, hard drive, or solid state drive used to store crypto offline. Yes. A currency that is declared a currency by the government, not backed by a physical commodity.
Currency? Yeah.
Yep. First known purchase with Bitcoin. Yes. A loan of sorts offered by a broker or an exchange during margin trading.
No. Pass.
Digital token that represents a unique asset such as art, music, or other digital items. Yep. Smallest unit of Bitcoin.
Satoshi.
Online storage for cryptocurrency provided by an exchange or
Hot
a third
storage,
party.
warm storage.
Yes. Co-founder of
Charles
Cardano.
Hoskinson.
Yes. The maximum amount of Bitcoin
21
that can
million,
ever
but I'll debate
exist.
that.
Yes. Oh, that was good. Let's see how many you got right.
Thank you.
You did good. Got everything right, except for the one. The one was
leverage.
leverage. That was the answer. Loan offered by a broker or an exchange during margin trading was leverage. No one has ever got this one right, so I should probably just throw it out. All right, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Not bad.
I'm sorry, I didn't break any records.
Oh, don't be sorry. You did great. Well, Matt, I just want to say thank you for your time today, and thank you for all your knowledge and information that you gave us. I really like that you're really contributing to digital assets by just writing and doing your analysis. I think it's important for people to be able to analyze and then read and then form their own opinions. So thank you for that. Leave us with an end note.
I would say everything we do at GSR in terms of crypto research is all publicly available. We write crypto content. We write daily market updates, monthly updates, news recaps, and deeper research reports on a wide array of topics. So I'd say go check it out, gsr.io/insights.
And I'll leave that information down in the link along with our information.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Great. Thank you for being here. All right, don't hang up. I'm stopping.